All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome. We are glad you are here for the Future of Education Entrepreneurship panel hosted by GW's Graduate School of Education and Human Development. My name is Tiffany Sikorsky. I am an associate professor in the School of Education and helping host today's event. So we are about to hear from a stellar group of panelists who will share how their research shapes their thinking about the opportunities and challenges posed by entrepreneurial interests in education. If you'd like, feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We will also be using the chat today to collect questions during the event and in our Q&A period at the end. But first, I am pleased to introduce one of the thought leaders and supporters of today's event for our opening remarks, Professor and Dean of the Graduate School of Education, Michael Foyer.
Thank you, Tiffany, and hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a real terrific opportunity, and I want to thank Tiffany and our other colleagues for having put such great thought into this activity. This essentially began as a conversation at the university leadership level about ways to sort of bring to the surface and bring to more public visibility the idea that being located where we are in the nation's capital and being located and being involved in work on education at a time when so much is changing, that it would be interesting to think about how to kind of bring some of those ideas together and to make sure that there's a strong research basis for our future thinking about GW and our School of Education as perhaps a locus or a hub for thinking about problems in science policy generally and in education policy more specifically. And in this case, what we are about to have is a really interesting conversation about educational entrepreneurship. Having been in the business of education policy now for, at least 40 years, wandering in the desert of education policy, so to speak. The idea of bringing together principles of instruction, pedagogy, and the theory of teaching and learning with the advent of new technology and with the idea of partnership between the public and private sectors has been on again and off again a very important part of the education policy landscape. So this is a terrific opportunity for us to get up to date on some of the latest thinking in this field. And I just want to say again, on behalf of all of us here in GSHED, but more broadly in GW, where there is a great deal of interest in what we can be doing as a community to promote some of the ideals of an evidence-informed set of policy options and initiatives and ideas concerning the future of education and with a spirit of entrepreneurship. So with that, I'm again grateful and thankful to Tiffany and Ryan and others who worked on this, and of course, my dear colleague Yoshi, who you're about to hear from, and our guests. And I'll turn it back to you, Tiffany, for introductions. But thank you all in advance.
Great, thank you so much, Dean Foyer. So today our panel will be moderated by Professor Ryan Watkins. Dr. Watkins is the director of GW's Educational Technology Leadership Program and lead of the Human Technology Collaboration Research Team.
Thank you, Tiffany. We're very privileged today. We have three excellent panelists, and I'll introduce them, and then we'll have a short moderated discussion where we'll answer some questions and bounce it around between the panel. And then we'll turn it over to the audience. So as you're listening, please jot down your questions in the chat room, or you can raise your hand later on and ask them as well by turning on your mic. I would like to remind everyone, though, please keep your mic muted during the panel conversation. So the first member of our panel that I'll introduce is Dr. Barak-Medina. He is a visiting researcher with the Human Technology Collaboration Research Lab. And as a recent director of the Israeli Ministry of Education's AI in Education Lab, Dr. Barak-Medina led the development of a research and policy agenda into AI in education. He is also a consultant for educational strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We also have Dr. Nakamura, who is an assistant professor of human and organizational learning in the Graduate School of Education. Dr. Nakamura is a leading scholar of women's leadership development and social entrepreneurship in Japan. Prior to joining the GW faculty, she directed the Neuroscience to Enhance Leadership Development program and the Future of Learning Forum at Columbia University. Finally, we have Dr. Shittu, an associate professor of engineering management and systems engineering in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at GWU. Dr. Shittu leads multiple efforts at GW to understand how to incorporate entrepreneurial skills into the undergraduate engineering curriculum, including recent projects funded by the National Science Foundation and the Chem Entrepreneurial Engineering Network. He is the faculty lead for NSF's Mid-Atlantic I-Core Hub, a member of the National Innovation Network, and has participated in 2 NSF I-Core team projects as well. So we're very thrilled to have all 3 of them as our guest panelists today. To go ahead and get the question started, this one will be for any of the 3 panelists, and whoever wants to jump in first can get first shot at it. As a researcher, what do you think are the pressing questions pertaining to entrepreneurship in education?
I can go ahead.
Go for it, Yoshi. Thank you.
What comes to my mind first is about what formal and informal learning opportunities that help the people develop entrepreneurship and sustain their enterprise activities. I can go on, but I will leave it to other panelists.
Yeah, I can jump in at this point. Thank you, Dr. Watkins, for the eloquent introduction. Thank you very much, Tiffany, for putting this together. And I'm excited to meet with you, Dr. Führer, the Dean of the Graduate School of Education and Human Development, GSHED. To your question, Dr. Watkins, the answer to the question is multifaceted, but what rises to the top in terms of the challenges we see in the academia is many academic members or faculty members see themselves as academics. And the idea of doing business or even, considering entrepreneurship is alien to them. And I can tell you, as someone in the School of Engineering, where people are sitting on real groundbreaking innovative research initiatives, but then you pitch the idea of, do you know you can commercialize this to them? And they're like, commercial what? Because they see themselves first as academics. So the question becomes a challenging one to address in terms of making them see the viability, the commercial viability of that real research stuff they are working on. And I have a lot to talk about this as we go on. I'll keep quiet as well to allow our third panelist to chime in as well.
I guess I'll join in now, and thank you for the introduction and for the event in general. And I have to agree with many things that were just said about, first of all, that entrepreneurship is something that you do, and I'm not sure that a research perspective is that fertile into looking at it. And I kind of agree with the way you were described as someone who tries to bring entrepreneurial skills into academia, which is great. My point of view is based on a lot of work doing regarding policy and regarding promoting actual entrepreneurship in the educational world, mainly in Israel, not just. And I would say that from this point of view, there are three big questions that people who want to become educational entrepreneurs need to ask themselves. The first question would be, do you want to work within the educational system, or outside of it? That would be like the first question. It relates in a way to the question of who's your client, in a way. Do you want to sell to schools and districts and governments, or do you want to sell to end users in a way? Because you can find educational, let's say, products aiming at both kind of sectors. But that's a very important question, because each one of them leads to a completely different avenue of development and work, which I won't get into right now. But that's the first question. The second question, I think, is, do you want to revolutionize, or do you want to engage in incremental improvements? Which is also like two very different ways of looking at educational entrepreneurship. People who want to revolutionize are those who think or try to disrupt the educational system, say, I have a completely different vision of how education should be handled. And I would say that many of them are probably right. But if that's the place that you're coming from, you're set for a very hard road of obstacles. The second avenue is saying, no, I'm going to try to look at education as it is and find places in which I identify problems in it and try to bring solutions. Another question that relates to that is, do you want to work locally or or not locally, like universally or nationwide, which means, or internationally, which means that locally you can spot problems very easily and make the efforts to work with them. And I have to say that I respect and admire local educational entrepreneurs a great deal, because they are the ones who sort of sustain the relevance of educational systems, much more sometimes from those who try to revolutionize it, I have to say. And the third question is, do you want to go tech or low tech? If you're an ed tech entrepreneur, that's one thing. But I want to first break the linkage between entrepreneurship and technology, because a lot of educational entrepreneurship is not technological. And I have to say that there's a very big room for that as well. So that would be my first answer to the first question.
If I may just tag onto that, I think it's important we make very clear distinctions between radical innovation and incremental innovation. This takes me back to my grad school days when we read Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. In Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, he made very clear distinctions between, incremental innovations, which in today's economy might not even get to see the market. But today we're talking about radical innovation, a new way of doing things. And for us to have a new way of doing things, whoever is at the forefront of making those changes must imbibe what we call the entrepreneurial mindset. Now, the entrepreneurial mindset is not my own making. It's something I learned from my participation on the current Entrepreneurial Engineering Network. That's the Keen Foundation, which is supported by the Kern Family Foundation. The entrepreneurial mindset simply talks about 3 C's, just 3 C's. Number 1 is curiosity. Okay, are you curious about that phenomena? Are you curious about that challenge confronting the society? And I see Dr. Corte mentioned something about social innovation in the chat box. Are you curious about why do we have the problem of homelessness, for example? Can we solve the problem of homelessness? What has been done? What is lacking? That's on the social side. What about on the technical side? In other words, are we curious enough to be engaged in looking for solutions to these societal challenges? Sometimes solutions need not be technological. Solutions might just be in terms of structure, in terms of strategy, or even changing the societal mindset. That's the first C, curiosity. The second C is, are we able to make connections, right? Innovation itself does not exist in isolation of extant knowledge, of the knowledge we already have as a society. What can we cobble together in terms of making connections to address some of these societal challenges that we see? And the last of the three C's is what is called creating value. It's one thing to be curious, it's another thing to make connections, but to what value, to what purpose? What's the bottom line? Are we having a minimum viable product from the initiative of this entrepreneurial mindset? Once those three C's align, then we would have ameliorated whatever challenges that may stand in the way of innovation or even entrepreneurship, as the case may be.
Well, and I think to Dr. Corte's point as well with the social innovation, we don't want to always think of value and just in terms of financial value, but there can be other types of value that can lead to entrepreneurship type
Exactly.
work within.
Let me give one example. So this past semester, with one of my colleagues, we co-taught a class that we called Engineering for Social Innovation. This is Dr. Erica Wortham, who is a social anthropologist. She does ethnography work extensively, and she brings in the storytelling component of what she does to engineering students who, by definition, know nothing about storytelling. But it's not just about telling a story. It's about trying to tell a story to address a societal issue. And the students in the class, they took on the problem of homelessness. We took a walk around the GW area, just looking at all these tents springing up. And we also engaged with the shelter where breakfast is provided for some of those. And we started asking questions. At the end of the day, like you rightly said, Dr. Watkins, it's not about the financial gain. Remember, social innovation is addressing solutions, addressing challenges faced by those that are marginalized in the society. And to a large extent, it's not always about the monetary gain. It's about advancing our ecosystem as a society. And you can even call it a civic responsibility, for example.
And Yoshi, this some ways connects to your research, I believe.
Yes,
the media,
mhm.
the media sometimes portrays entrepreneurship as a result of this lone visionary, the Steve Jobs type of portrayal. And what Deo is describing is much different in terms of groups working together. How accurate is the lone visionary portrayal, especially among the entrepreneurs that you've interviewed for your research?
So in my research context, the Japanese women social entrepreneurs, idea and a passion comes from internal self. So it's start with that individual. However, it's interestingly, in the context of Japan, they have the paradox mindset in a way, meaning they want individuality, which is uniqueness, authenticity, because they have their own idea to solve social problem and they have strong passion about it. But then in order for them to take an action is that they value relationality, right? So relation is very important for them. So make me wonder that connects with the relational leadership in that aspect, that they support and value co-constructing space, connecting with those who share the same vision and passion and struggles that they really wanted to do something to better support the society, the community they are in. So they striking a balance in a way that they value individuality, they respect each individual's characteristics and strengths, but also and ideas, but also they really support mutual constructing space.
And I guess back over to you, Eran. And you've had multiple international experiences, but if we just want to focus in on your experiences in Israel most recently, how do you find Israel similar or different than other countries in their approach to educational entrepreneurship?
Okay. It's a little complicated to describe that, but I'll try to maybe use might be a little simplistic way to describe the way countries' policies can approach entrepreneurship. And I would say that that way would put them on a scale between centralization and decentralization. In a more centralized and I mean that in the way it approaches educational entrepreneurship and not in other ways. A centralized policy would mean that the Ministry of the Ministry of Education would probably have big bodies of research and development that are usually also those who sort of initiate the ecosystem in that place. And Israel is a little closer to that kind of a model, that there's big R&D units in the government that are dedicated to promoting educational entrepreneurship. On the other side, you would find places that sort of more decentralized. They don't have big R&D bodies or big innovation bodies at the government level, but they try to decentralize that to local authorities. I think the US is a little bit more like that. And I cannot say that a place has more or less advantages. It's something that needs to be to work well in the context of the place, because, for example, Israel, if I look at ed tech entrepreneurship, it has a very big problem because Hebrew is a very small market. And without some sort of incentive from a centralized R&D body, there will be almost no edtech, let's say, in Israel. On the other hand, Israel is, in its nature and its culture, is very entrepreneurial. I mean, no one accepts the reality as it is in a way, and always try to change. I mean, so there's a lot of entrepreneurship, but the things that do materialize or scale up are things that are involved with a centralized body of R&D, of educational R&D. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. And while we're on the international topic, I know that Dr. Shittu has traveled the world and was in Kenya in the fall doing work there too. I guess as you've traveled the world, how do you see entrepreneurship taking place in different countries? And how might that be similar or different than what we see here in the United States?
Oh my goodness, thank you for the question. What you find is that, you know, if I may use this language, there are 50 shades of entrepreneurship. 50 shades in the sense that when you look at economies, when I say economies, advanced economies like Israel, the United States, or even Europe to a certain extent, it's always truly about innovation, right? Breaking that ceiling, coming up with novel ideas. That's what Christensen calls radical innovation. In many of these developing parts of the world, one of which I come from, and you are right, I was in Nairobi in October for a week. And what you realize is that these are societies that are still grappling with the very basic necessities of existence. Okay, water purification is a challenge. Sustainable electricity is a challenge. Even conducive environment for living that we take for granted in this part of the world, there are challenges. So when you look at those environments,
believe that his audio has stopped. Is that true for everyone else too?
I can still see and hear everybody fine. I think possibly Professor Shitu's Wi-Fi crashed on him.
Great timing for technology glitches. Okay, well, we'll catch back up with him when he reconnects and he can tell us more about what he's seen in Africa and other places he's been. And he hopefully will tell us some of the things that the National Science Foundation is funding to expand entrepreneurship around the world as well. As we wait for that though, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the technology since you brought that up, Eran. As we know, with a lot of the modern data-related information-intensive technologies in education, they often collect a broad array of data, but much of that data is not all that useful to us as researchers, at least what gets shared out publicly because of FERPA in the United States and other limitations.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you're back.
I'm back. I'm so sorry. You know, my internet at home, it just takes off, you know, abruptly at random times of the day. So now I'm using my, you know, the one I have on my phone. But I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that break. But as I was saying, so when you look at some of those developing parts of the world, their challenges are very different. So I was talking about solar electricity. Even solar electricity, where you have preponderance of irradiation, is still a luxury, significant luxury. Now, even here in the West, it's still a luxury because when you look at rooftop solar panels, you only find them in luxurious neighborhoods, even around DC, for example. But to my point, the innovation that exists in this developing part of the world are innovations that are sustainable, innovations that are homegrown, because when they go abroad and harvest some of these sophisticated technologies, number one, they fail. Number two, the expertise to maintain them is not there. That's why when you harvest, you know, innovation from another environment to some of the societies, they don't last long. So what we are saying for the developing world is to innovate organically. It's not mandatory that we should have solar panels. It could be a case of the nomad, the agrarian nomad who rears cattle and moves cattle around. It could be a device hung on the neck of the cattle. As the device oscillates back and forth, it charges an chemical device that actually stores electricity. For example, those are homegrown organic solutions that the African society, or at least the developing world, is beginning to look at.
Yeah, and I think that how they're looking at technologies and non-technological solutions to their challenges in developing countries can help guide us in how we think about entrepreneurship in the US as well. And that includes in education. For example, Kenya has some famous examples of how they've been able to really systematize educational delivery to expand access to education far beyond where they thought they could go even 5-10 years ago, delivering high quality instruction to Kenyan students, all the way to some of the most remote schools. It's very impressive. And that, again, that's not a technological development, it's a curriculum development that's allowing this to happen. And then it's supported by just a couple of technologies. I see that Dean Foyer has his hand up and would like to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. If I could, I want to go back for a moment to what Eran mentioned about the issues in a country such as Israel, where there is a language constraint on the marketability of new technology. And it's very interesting because in your answer to that, to the question that you were posed, you said how in a place such as Israel, where the role of government in funding and investing in the infrastructure of technology is so important, partly because the economic incentives to private developers, given the language constrained, is not there. And in sort of standard economic theory, what you've outlined here is a classic case of why investment in science and technology is a public good, and why, in fact, government needs to be willing and able to make those kinds of investments, which I think is a really important reminder to anybody in any country thinking about issues of innovation and technology. But I just wonder, since you've raised this, it occurred to me that, at least in the case of Israel, you have this government investment in the infrastructure coupled with a lot of individual level, quote unquote, high-tech kind of innovative spirit. And I wonder if there are other ways to think of creating that sort of an environment and a culture of individual entrepreneurship with government intervention, if not at the level of infrastructure, at the level of diffusion of the results of that individual entrepreneurship. But either way, I think the idea of a public-private partnership is so significant in this sort of conversation. I just wanted, maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit for us.
Well, it's kind of a complicated question or issue that maybe is very specific to Israel, but it might be even true to other places, in which I'll have to say that there are sometimes, I'm not sure if that's the answer that you're looking for, but I would say that the public sector, I mean, the government, is always, let's be a little cautious, not the most effective organizations, okay? And one of the symptoms of that is that once the government is both in charge of cultivating the ecosystem and is at the same time the client or the biggest client of entrepreneurship, and those two parts of the government, the ecosystem of innovation, cultivation, and let's say more operational side of the government, don't necessarily employ the same policy, it creates a very big problem for entrepreneurs. I would say that this thing, in order to work policy-wise, for this to work very well, it needs to be, in a way, more coherent. But I do have to say that one thing that does happen in Israel is that there's a big tradition in last years. I have to say that I was involved in it in a way, of helping entrepreneurs develop their systems, try them out, basically for next to nothing, I mean, without almost getting paid within the Israeli educational system, but then making their big sales out of Israel. So many entrepreneurs use Israel as sort of an internal lab, benefiting sometimes from the part of the government that cultivates the innovation ecosystem, and then they cannot sell their systems to Israel anymore, and they sell them outside of Israel. So, but the bright side of it is that we still maintain the entrepreneurial skills and the technology development side, even though not necessarily the Israeli educational system benefits of it all the time.
If I may add to that discussion quickly, Dimfara, you want to say something to that, please? Okay, if I may add to that, I think the way we're looking at it in the US, based on my understanding, is, you can look at it as top-down, where government provides the capital formation to kind of create the groundbreaking discoveries, after which the private sector now comes in and then takes on the diffusion and proliferation and adoption. So that's one strategy, which I call top down. The other strategy, which we also have in the US, is bottom up, In other words, when you look at the National Science Foundation, now they just created a new directorate that they call TIP, Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. That bottom-up approach is whereby individuals like you and I are provided seed funding to kind of explore our commercialization idea. And from there, we make those groundbreaking discoveries. So what I see is, whether you're looking at it from top down or bottom up, it's very important, like Eran said, to create that ecosystem where the policies are in alignment, because a misalignment of policies is just a chaos for disaster in the innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, the importance of policy can't be overlooked. And most recently, the OECD out of Europe has indicated that the gender gap in entrepreneurship is beginning to close, which is good news. Yoshi, what policies have been most effective in supporting women leaders in entrepreneurship in Japan and helping bring down some of that divide?
Well, thank you, Dr. Watkins. A great question. Current Prime Minister has the new capitalism strategy that aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Goals, Development Goals, and that really emphasized the importance of the cultivating and supporting women social entrepreneurs. And that helps the revitalize Japanese economy as Japan struggles economic stagnance for years, and they have a lot of the issues in terms of the elderly populations and the childbirth decline rate, etc. So that definitely helps coming from the Japan nationwide. This is the approach. This is what we emphasize. But then it's not that easy to change drastically overnight. It takes a long time. And sometimes I hear from my research population saying that government or local government has their own objectives. And they want the entrepreneurs to modify the way they work or adjust. So that's a little hidden agenda they have to really uncover and surfacing it and be able to communicate why this doesn't work in that way, what they want. And it's really communication strategies is so important for those social entrepreneurs to be able to work with the government officials so that they can obtain support continuously, yet they can also eventually help that they believe in a way that help those population that they want to serve for the public good.
Yeah,
Deo,
if
I
may
was asking you a
add,
question. Yep.
I just quickly want to add to what Dr. Yoshi said. If you find in any endeavor, in order to ramp up participation, be it gender, be it diversity, be it, we call it diversity, equity, and inclusion in the US, there's got to be a targeted effort. Targeted efforts in the sense that you make it purposeful. In other words, purposeful empowerment. And one of the programs we've seen with this effort, especially here in the US, is the GEMS program, GEMS. I don't know what the full meaning of that acronym is, but this GEMS program focuses on minority participation in the innovation space. So when you make this purposeful empowerment and you make it targeted, then you most likely will succeed to see increases in the count of that population in that environment. And that's what we see today across the academia as well.
Well, and I think that's a great transition to the question that I was thinking of for you, actually, Deo. So it's been said that entrepreneurship is contagious. And I think that as a school of education, as a university, we are looking to grow our entrepreneurial enterprise and enthusiasm among our students and our faculty. So based on your experience, what do you see as some of the essentials for growth of the entrepreneurship mindset within an institution of higher education.
Excellent, excellent. One of the things I see with, the growth of entrepreneurship in the education realm is, number one, the incentive system. Okay, is the incentive system really there for that academic to be entrepreneurial? Right? I mean, a junior faculty member, for example, who is pursuing innovative ideas and is trying to do entrepreneurship, the question is, does that factor into the way that junior faculty is evaluated? So the incentive system is key. It has to be there. Number two is at GW especially, and I think maybe across other schools, we do have an Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Again, the reason I mention this office is that when you put in place the resources for people to flourish, then the idea of flourishing will eventually take off. And I think one of the things we've done at GW is creating this dedicated office whereby you have an idea, you have a concept, call up the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and they will be there in your office brainstorming with you what your idea is. So I think the incentive mechanism must be aligned. The resources must be in place for these ideas to actually not only germinate, but also flourish in any given environment. And lastly, for someone from a systems engineering background, it's essential that the entrepreneurship mindset entails what we call the systems thinking. In other words, innovation doesn't exist in isolation of other domains. So how do we bring in the different stakeholders in advancing any potential idea we may have? And I think that is where resources such as the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship could be of value. And I'm preaching this to my colleagues: knock on their door. Jim Chung is waiting for you to knock on his door. We have people waiting to assist faculty members, even students, on their entrepreneurship and innovation journey.
Thanks, Dale. I'm looking up at the time, and we do want to have question and answer time with the audience. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Q&A, and then we can come back and if there's any final questions for the panel after that. Does anyone in the audience want to ask a question? You can turn on your mic and ask to, or you can raise your hand. And either way. Okay, I see Ron has a question.
Hi, my name's Ron. I have a question for Dr. Medina. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see new generative AI tools and how they fit into curriculum design and like personalizing education for individual kids.
Do you have like a spare 8 hours now to talk about? Well, that's a complicated question. The easy answer is that basically education system, by the way, that is part of the entrepreneurial spirit that you want to cultivate. If you assume that most of your teachers have that entrepreneurial spirit and they are open to changes and they can experiment, and they have also the legitimacy of the system to experiment in things, I would expect many of them to play with it. To not first of all, there's like the discussion of whether to allow it or not allow it, for me seems like a cliche at this point. Of course allow it, of course use it, of course implement it, but do it with an open eye of how it will affect skills and how it will affect other aspects of your educational goals. Maybe, so yes, allow it, try to look how to use it as, I mean, a way for children to express themselves, try to find ways on how to use it for developing skills. For example, editing ChatGPT output is a very, in my eyes, is a very advanced skill. Taking it and then second guess it or check it. That's something that you need to do. The point is, I think that ChatGPT is really, and DALL-E and Midjourney and all of them, this is really the beginning. I mean, if we'll have this panel a year from now, we'll talk on other systems that will come up by then. Basically, the thing is, I think maybe it's like a proof of why that, and also COVID, you would say, there are all proofs of how entrepreneurial spirit is crucial for any kind of organization or service that seeks to be relevant and effective. I hope that answers your question, Ron.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, do you see in the extreme near future, like within a year, these tools being used to generate lesson plans or stuff like that in schools? Or I'm just wondering, do you think it's still
it's already done? I mean, and it's not even new, I would say. I spoke earlier about Israeli companies that do their testing in Israel and then sell outside of Israel. So there's one of them, I won't say its name, but one of them that's the thing that it does. It creates lesson plans for personalized, by the way, group lessons. I mean, one of the problems in differentiated instruction is that teachers say, well, it's like preparing 30 classes for every class because I have to personalize the material or the assignments for every student. So there are now systems that can do that, and they are based on both performance, but also on things like personality measurements and other things. They also suggest the teacher with how to group the students, not necessarily by level, but by how previous performance indicate that these, for example, Ron and Eran, when they sit together, they sort of work well together. So there are systems that already can do that. I'm not sure it's really widely bought or used at the moment. And even when it's bought, not necessarily teachers use it to its full capacity, but what you're talking about, it exists. And I'm not even mentioning China, in which or the US, in which you have students sitting in front of computers, or in the US, there's the Carpe Diem model. I don't know if you've heard of it, the Carpe Diem schools. You have children sit 3 hours in front of a computer, and then you go as personalized as you want. Not necessarily a good thing, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, it sounds like a discussion that we should definitely set up another forum for. Yes, you want to go, Deo, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Wright.
Let me add quickly to that. You know, when people talk about AI systems, there's still a lot of skepticism about them out there, especially in terms of their trustworthiness. We are currently running an AI program. We're training 25 PhD students over the next 5 years in AI systems, especially in trustworthiness of AI systems. Now, when you talk about AI systems, it's important to make a distinction between whether it's explainable AI or interpretable AI. In many cases, neither of those two actually can be achieved. And that's why, the example Eran gave about grouping systems, what's the mindset of the developer of the AI? Is the mindset of the developer of the AI to foster inclusion, or is the mindset of the developer of the AI to actually foster exclusion? That's the question we're asking in that National Research Traineeship Program in terms of trustworthiness of these systems. And to a large extent, why haven't we had self-driving cars proliferate our streets? Believe it or not, most of the flights we take are run by AI systems. In fact, when you have turbulence that is not well managed, that's when the human is in the loop. And in most cases, when it's flawless, that's the AI system. Do we have the same level of trustworthiness in other systems that are currently being developed? That is the food for thought in terms of innovation and the integration of AI in innovative spaces. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Dwayne, you've been very patient. If you want to come on for your question.
Oh, no, thank you, Dr. Watkins, and thank everyone for a very, very interesting discussion. My question has to do with culture, right? And how the impact of culture may impact the educational entrepreneurship sort of conversation. And it's really sparked by the construction of this panel. We have three wonderful scholars from three very distinct parts of the world that probably have three very distinct backgrounds, right? Japan is nothing like Israel, et cetera, et cetera. And Deo talked about this a little bit, but education is all about culture, right? What is education? We're having this fight in America right now is different in one culture versus another. And I think, what scares, quite frankly, a lot of people that look like me and are around my generation about the word social entrepreneurship is the focus on entrepreneurship and not the social, right? Because entrepreneurship sort of invokes a term of capitalistic domination and maybe even colonialization that, young people are, for better or for worse, being trained and skewed away from, right? So I wonder if each of you could talk about the culture you come from, the culture you research on, and the impact of that culture on your definition of social entrepreneurship, your application of social entrepreneurship, but more importantly, selling it to cultures that may not necessarily have been treated so well over the last hundreds of years by capitalism.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Let me answer a brief, trying to make it brief. I know it's a time limit we have here. It's a very intriguing question. Interestingly, one of my research findings interviewing women social entrepreneurs in Japan is that they all have international experience. And it made me wonder, does that impact them to be creative, innovative, thinking out of box? And what is that? Is it critical reflection happening to them? And then some of them mentioned that. Is it something that they had eye-opening experiences, maybe incrementally, not just change the course of their action overnight, but they mentioned that throughout their interviews. And I think that education, that's a part of education. They value learning and development. They value so much. They want to continue to learn the formally, informally. They seek out opportunities. And I wonder if this is something that we all can think about and believe, at least I believe, and I think you all believe in power of education. That's something that we can provide opportunities for them to think critically and help them to take an action.
Right. If I may jump in quickly, your question is so valid, Dwayne, that you realize that all innovations to a large extent are micro. In other words, what people innovate on in most cases is something that originates from a prior experience or a personal experience, like Dr. Yoshi mentioned. And I'll give you an example. In our social innovation class, when we started teaching this class with Dr. Wortham, and Dr. Sikosti is actually part of the team for that project, by the way, we had students who brought in personal experiences. I mean, we had students who lost their dads at some point, at a tender age, and mom had to work multiple jobs, and paying rent, housing became a challenge. And that kind of fueled this individual's thinking about how do we address the problem of making housing available to all. In many cases, when people talk about in fact, in that class, we said homelessness is not the right terminology. It's derogatory. We should use the term the unhoused. How do we address the problem of the unhoused? To most people passing by in the street, they interpret the unhoused people as people who have probably mental challenges, maybe, addictions and what have you. While that is true, believe it or not, there are those out there as well that have their mental faculties intact, but they are just victims of certain circumstances. So to your question, Dr. Dwayne, the innovative ideas most have actually originates from their personal experiences, their lived experiences. And we even saw that even with GW students, for example. So the point is, when you talk about social innovation, it's not social until you actually consider a solution that addresses a societal challenge on a wide scale, on a large scale basis.
And we have time for one more question. Let's go to Alan.
Thank you all. I'm for a wonderful talk and wonderful panelists. I'm actually calling in from Tokyo. I'm a professor. I'm a sociologist who at ICU, and I've had some certainly management experiences in the Silicon Valley. This is actually more of a question directed at Dr. Nakamura. How do you, in some degree, you did kind of diagnose the problem and proffer the solution with regard to kind of education and entrepreneurship in the Japan case. But this is a question that I've struggled with for the past 6 years. And, I am that sociologist who tells my students, you've got to leave Japan, right? So that's kind of one thing that's confirmed by your research, right? But are there other things, that you, I don't know, that maybe you see as a model for as a university encouraging entrepreneurship, or things on the pipeline that you're working on to enhance higher education, and just kind of, inculcating that thinking that like the brightest and smartest students, they should aspire to build things. But, as you probably already know, they don't. They often work for a company where ideas come to die. And so how do you kind of, this is a very challenging situation, I think, in Japan in particular. So I don't know if you want to comment on that any further, or if you had advice for a sociology professor interested in entrepreneurship in general and trying to articulate that advantage to my students and change their mindset.
Well, thank you so much. Such a wonderful question. It takes another couple hours to engage in the discussions. What comes to my mind is that who I interviewed in my research is that those who struggled but had a success in developing their social enterprise. From what I see in their patterns, the commonalities is that they constantly seek for expansion of their network. Network meaning more a divergent network. They look for those who are successful in the role model, and they look for something that they can break the barrier. Part of it, some of them, they go for outside of Japan to get the fresh ideas, different ways of thinking, and build further development of the network. And I can also see that they also have strong passion to make their society better. And the triggering moments really helps. That my initial hypothesis is about earthquake can be a triggering moment for those individuals. There's something that life-changing event, something that nationwide event may help them to change their course of action. And that this kind of triggering moments, we might be able to create for individuals, not the devastating way, but more positive, bright way. So that's maybe educational space we are here, that I hope that we can continue to think about what other opportunities to create triggering moments.
Well, I want to thank each of the panelists for joining us today. Let's give a big round of applause for each of our panelists. Virtual wave, good job, Lex. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Tiffany, for being the instigator and the motion behind getting this to happen. Thanks to Dean Foyer for kicking us off earlier today and for joining us. This is an ongoing topic that I'm sure we will come back to again. as well as some of the other related topics, such as Dr. Wright's comments around culture and how culture influences and is influenced by entrepreneurship, some more around the generative AI tools and how those will lead or be a large part of entrepreneurship and education going forward and so forth. So I want to thank everyone. And with that, have a good evening.